Hello. I take it we're starting. I was expecting someone to introduce us, but I guess it's up to me. I don't see anyone else in the room. Ramon, is there a way I can see who my guests are? There's Shelly. Hello,
Hi,
Shelly.
hi,
How
how
are
are
you?
you?
I'm just
Hello.
fine. And there's Jerome. Jerome is feeling a little backwards today, right? You're
A
flipped?
little bit,
Or
a little
no,
bit.
is that Randy that's
Actually, it's,
flipped?
it's actually
Someone's
quite
flipped.
appropriate. Story of my life, if you will.
Cristian, welcome.
Thank you.
I hear you. Randy,
Looking
how are
forward.
you doing? I'm just doing a quick kind of blurby intro. We'll have time to introduce ourselves later. I'm Mauricio Cordero. I teach a comics course at MIT where each year my students, I have to ask them this question: what's harder, comics or rocket science? Comics wins every time. So it's a challenge. It's a lot of fun, really bright kids. And I have been publishing a little bit myself, but not nearly as much as the panelists. So I'm going to let you, the experts, answer all our questions. But one thing, I've been to so many Comic Cons and I've seen just panel after panel of how to publish comics. I think we've done enough of that. I want to ask the panel today, how can we ruin our careers? How can we just not publish? How can we just screw everything up so badly we are not going to get our work out there? So, what I really mean is, what are the things that are holding people back from actually getting published? What are those little mistakes that just, you know, right, just razor wire, just right on that they could have fixed, but they didn't, and project goes down the drain, and those sorts of questions. So I was thinking about this week because back in the 80s, I had a roommate, and we had a very extraordinary opportunity. We got to meet John Waters, the film producer. We had dinner with him. I was kind of cramped in to the end of the booth, and we had just crazy entourage. And during dinner, John Waters said, "You are the perfect guy for me, not me, my roommate, for this movie I'm working on. You're the perfect type. I want to hire you. I want you to be in film." John Waters gave him his card, and my roommate at times just sitting back saying, "Ah, John's going to call me." And I kept kind of prodding him, saying, "Hey, this is a big director, indie director. Give him a call. Just pick up the phone, give him a call." I said, "No, he wants me. He's going to call me."
Oh,
On and on. So, end of the story. My roommate was not Johnny Depp, so you can
Mhm.
imagine how the story turns out. He did not get the part in Crybaby, which was the role
Oh
that John
man.
Waters wanted to. In. Yeah, I know. He could have been Johnny Depp of I don't know. Anyhow, I don't know if that's a good thing anymore. However, I want to talk to you guys about um, similarly harrowing stories in the publishing industry. And why don't we first go around and each of us can introduce, well, each of you can introduce yourselves and tell me just one harrowing story, one mistake you made in trying to get published. Let's start with Shelley.
oh, great. Thank you so much. I get first. Well, before I introduce myself and reveal
Sorry.
my harrowing story, I want to know if you think your roommate's problem was that he actually had fear of succeeding. Because I think you didn't finish the story. What do you think stopped your roommate from contacting John Waters? Was it ego, or was it fear, or a little bit of both?
Uh, I, I mean, if we had like a whole hour to talk about this, it'd be interesting. But I think it really, they're really intertwined. The biggest, the loudest wagon. Sorry, the loudest. What do you call them? Barrel is the empty barrel, right?
Yeah.
So I think the ego was just so inflated, but the self worth wasn't there, and he was really expressing that doubt in the most uh, concrete and self sabotaging way, which might have been the best choice for his life and the life that he wanted to live. But I just thought back
The,
on
the
that
reason I throw that
missed
back
opportunity.
to you, well, the reason
Yeah.
I threw that back to you is because in my experience,
Mhm.
fear is the number one reason that people don't make comics. It's answering the question, how do you know when a page is a finished page? I've been a comic book editor for 33 years. I worked first at Kamiko in 1988, cut my teeth at an indie comics publisher. When it went chapter 7, I spent a little time in film and video, which is what my degree is in from Ithaca College. And then I got my job at DC Comics right at the start of when the Vertigo imprint launched. So I came in at the greatest time, I think, in modern comics for creator owned comics. So I was an editorial ingenue in 1992. And I can tell you what my first editorial error was. It was a big one. I was working with Neil Gaiman on The Sandman, and I had been reading lots of comics, but my comics gateway drugs were the indie books. Love and Rockets, love the Hernandez brothers, Matt Wagner's Grendel. Wasn't really into too many mainstream books, but I did like Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol. I didn't read Sandman, so I had a lot of catching up to do. I was talking to Neil Gaiman on the phone, and I referred to Dream Country, which was a very popular trade paperback at the time, as Dream County. And I knew it was, I could hear myself saying it. All of the air sucked out of Manhattan. And I paused, and he was so kind to me. He said, just think a little bit bigger. It's Dream Country. And after that, oh, I could relax. But that was my first amateur error on the phone. I was mortified.
Hey,
Beautiful.
if I can jump in here, and I have to say, I have to apologize. I had technical error problem at the beginning, so I heard nothing of the opening. So I'm kind of jumping in cold here, but I just want to follow up on what Shelly said, and at least the part of the conversation I heard, which is, you know, when you're starting out, you just have to do the work. I mean, there's a quote from Dave Sim, at least it's attributed to Dave Sim, about get those first 100, 1,000 pages out of the way as soon as you can, because those are going to be your worst pages. So it's just to do the work. And if also to add, I've been doing my book. I actually started my book as a zine, as a zine that I uh, printed on photocopiers in the early 90s, and I'm still doing the book. It's now a full-size comic book. But what I did is I also put on my comp list. I was sending it to people in the industry or companies that I admired. And it wasn't, I wasn't really, I mean, if someone said, hey, here's a contract that will publish your book, that would have been great. But at the same time, what it was, one, it's a calling card, but two is, by having something people could see, people got to know me, not necessarily again for hire. And that's not what necessarily I was looking for. I just wanted to, grow my audience, and that's how I started out. Just zines and just sending a lot of them out, a lot of comp copies out.
I think it's fair to say,
I,
whether you're starting out or whether you're trying to stay relevant, finished is better than perfect. And I think that's a huge hurdle that just people in general cannot jump over. So that's what I hope we can impart to the people out there who have joined our panel or who we speak to in the future. Number one thing, just show up, do the work, and know when to turn in the page. As editors, I'm not sure how many editors are on the panel, but that's my main occupation. I also letter comics, and because I've been self-publishing for the past 4 years, I've taught myself other parts of the process. But it's so important to let it go or step away from the page, as I used to say to my freelancers when I would call them, and they wouldn't answer the phone, but I'd be on their answering machine. I'd say 5 words, step away from the page. You have to send it in because comics are all about the forward imperative. They're always in motion. And so I always say to people, it's not going to be perfect. You can't be perfect, but you have to keep the comic moving because it's basically alive. It needs to be watered and fed. It needs enthusiasm. It's the editor's job to help you get over the finish line, but you got to show up and you have to be fearless and flexible.
So
Okay,
it looks like we're jumping in right away, which is awesome. I love it. But for those who are joining us for the panel, we're just getting started. We haven't actually introduced ourselves, so maybe we should go around and do that so people know who we are. So maybe I'll go very quickly. Again, my camera is a little bit flipped here, so apologize if I'm looking from a weird angle. But my name is Jerome Walford. I'm an indie comics creator. I started in comics as an indie publisher in about 2012. And the main reason was to just give it a try. I had always been very curious about exploring and pursuing indie comics, so I thought just kind of go out there, see how it goes. And I've been going ever since. The imprint is Forward Comics, and it's great to be with you all.
thanks. And Jerome, I do want to get your just publishing disaster.
Well, certainly there have been several, but probably the easiest one would be, speaking of starting and not finishing, I had in the beginning so many different projects or ideas that I wanted to explore, and I started maybe 2 projects that I thought, these will be fun to do, and then before I knew it, I was sort of like developing this epic. And speaking of not finishing, there are 2 projects that I would love to at some point decide how to define more clearly, and sort of bring those to a close because they're already kind of out there. So, I think that kind of still haunts me to this day, that there are 2 projects out there that were with me since the beginning that, did not get the proper definition that they needed to really succeed.
So would you characterize that as having a project that was too ambitious right off the bat? Is that?
Yeah, and I imagine we'd have a lot more time to get into this because I want to give Cristian a chance to introduce himself. But yeah, I think that's one of the great things about jumping into indie comics. There's very low barrier of entry, but that is a very common mistake among indie creators, is that we start something and we don't properly define the scope of it. And, a project that might have been a great 20-page story suddenly becomes, in your mind, this 8 to 10 book epic that, again, may be a bit too much to bite off, particularly in the beginning. And it's not helpful to yourself or to those who would be potential fans.
It's true. I agree. Start small. And I think when Randy said the zine, it's a great way. It's a great entry in to think about a zine or even a short story, for what it's worth. But Cristian, tell us about yourself. You're the only person who hasn't chimed in.
Well, thanks for having me, by the way. I actually incidentally started with a zine in high school that I self-published. And I remember I was working at a fast food place up in Canada, Ottawa, Canada. And I saved up and I printed 60 copies, what I could afford. And I bound them myself. I put them like, to a page. I had to figure out the order of them. And I took them to comic shops. And so I started in that. And, I've been doing self-publishing since then. I mean, it's been well over 20 years,
Nice.
19 years, what I consider professionally, which is after college and university. So when I officially decided, and I officially in 2002 registered a small press up in Ottawa, and then later an art school, which I run online now. So for me in high school, when I started, I did self-publishing because I thought that's what you did, like it was like 95 and there was still like a lot of kind of a boom in the comics business, even though like the mainstream comics were declining at the time, but it seemed like anybody and their dog could publish a book. And to me, I never even thought then that I could, or that I should look for a publisher, do the project and then beg people to print it for me. I thought like, I'll just print my own few copies and then go out there. So to talk about the disaster, I was recently reviewing the first graphic novel that I published with my company in 2002. And I was a young chap and I was reviewing it, and It's not mainstream at all. It's very experimental, and I feel like that was a mistake in some ways. But the beauty, it's like a mistake and it isn't, because the beauty in being self-published is that you can take those chances because you can truly be an uncensored artist. And that's what my goal was at the very beginning, was to be, my own entity, my own, my own, I don't know, sovereign, if that's the correct term for it, So yeah, so that's the beauty of it. That's kind of it's a mistake in some ways because it's not very marketable, that first project. But I mean, I got to explore a lot of things, and that's what I learned in reviewing it recently, that I just kind of went for it, And now, being a much better editor 19 years later, now I think of my audience more than I did then. And that's really the learning curve that a lot of self-publishers, when they're starting out, I would encourage them to do, is to edit heavily and think of your audience from the very beginning. The sooner you do that, the better sales you'll have.
So to sum up, your worst publishing experience was, it doesn't sound like a bad one at all. It just sounds like
because I'm a positive person, I know how to spin things just for myself.
I know. That's why I want to get negative on this. It's so easy to talk about positives. No, I'm serious. Every Comic Con I go to, it's the same bits of information. Work hard, you'll get published. Bullshit. You won't get published just because you work hard. You won't get published just because you're talented. There are definitely things holding back people much more talented than the ones that I see in the pages of my local comic book store. And so I want to get to that meat. And I feel like you guys, some of you are resisting my siren call to crash onto these shores, these rocky shores. So Cristian.
Well, if I could only add to that, is that what keeps me positive as a creator and more resilient is that I kept going. And I think that's what makes us special as independent publishers, is that we keep going and we don't deal with failure. But yeah, I mean, my biggest failure with that first project, I remember I printed 300 copies. It was a perfect bound little book, and I must have sold 30, 40, that would have survived. Maybe I sold 60, but then when you really think about it, these things go into stacks and people forget about them. And, there was a lot of problems with that one. I didn't have like a clear title. It was actually title-less. It was a really artsy project. So, and I even sealed it in a bag. You didn't know what it was. It was just ridiculous.
Well, I actually want to connect to what Cristian is sharing here. That we're going to have a lot of these little disasters, and maybe they're a little bigger. And certainly looking back now, there's a lot we can learn from that process. There's a lot we can glean as we continue to grow and improve our skill set, but also our level of professionalism as we approach it, because it is a profession, it is a business, quote unquote. And so the lessons we learn from this is hopefully what we can pass on here. So I'm really glad to have this opportunity to be on with this panel and to share the things that we have learned. I think looking back, one of the things that I thought would have been really helpful for me, if I was to talk to my younger self when I was just starting out with this, I think I would ask myself a couple of really important questions, because certainly you don't have to have it all figured out. But if you can ask yourself some of these really probing questions, it will help you to be a lot more efficient about approaching indie comics. And I think one of those really important questions would be, what's really your vision? What are you trying to do? What are you really trying to accomplish with being in indie comics, right? And for me, as I've sort of looked through my own journey and I've talked to friends in my community, I think there are probably three major things you can go after when you're doing indie comics. You can either just try to get your work out there. That's one goal, right? That's one vision you could have. Or maybe you're trying to build some sort of like portfolio that you can use to attract a publisher, right? So maybe you're trying to gain a publisher, or maybe you're actually trying to build an indie business. You're trying to build an indie publishing business. And so those three different areas, there is a little bit of overlap, but they have very specific goals and priorities. And if you're trying to pursue one of those three, you would probably do less or more of certain particular things when it comes to, trying to achieve that goal. So I think that's one really important question. What is it you're trying to do? Are you trying to just get your work out there, just try to build your skill sets? Are you trying to attract a publisher? Or are you trying to build a business, right? And the answer to that question is probably going to make you choose certain priorities.
If I can just add to that, Jerome, I think regardless of which of those areas or buckets you choose to focus on, I think no matter what, you need to make it a story worth telling. You need to make it personal, because I think that's what separates people today from doing derivative work. And as an editor who has worked for indie companies, major companies, and now self-publishing, I'm just producing books that I want to read, and I'm telling stories that I feel in my gut. I want to share with others. And I think, Mauricio, just to go back to your point, how you want some negative stuff, I got tons to share, I promise you. But I think what's important, right now I'm working on my magnum opus, which is called Filth and Grammar, the comic book editor's secret handbook. And all of these things we're talking about, I pretty much put into my handbook, because there was never a guide to editing comics in my early years from 1988 to 2000. So I'm creating that handbook, and I hope it's going to be useful not just to people who want to become editors, but to anyone who wants to make comics, because it's the first comic book that takes you from idea, whether it's a basic idea or a brilliant idea, to execution from an editor's point of view. So all the things, if you said to me, Shelly, just give me 3 top tips about, what you would recommend that's negative not to do, I say to people all the time, hire an editor or a proofreader. Check your work and double check your work. One of the things I notice most of all is that a lot of artists want to write and draw and letter their own work. And it's very rare that people just starting out can do them all well. And so my number one thing is collaborate. Comics celebrates the art of community and collaboration. So the first thing I would do is hire a letterer, unless of course you're really an expert letterer. And as an editor who was always teased that she was a frustrated art director, I'm also creating Filth and Grammar to prove that editors are art directors, and you need a strong visual acuity to be a great comic book editor. So I think it's important when you're starting out, pick one area of making comics that you really think is your forte. Bring other people on to assist you in areas where maybe you need to learn a little bit more, or just work your butt off and study the craft. I taught myself how to letter over the past 3 years, and I love it to death, and I do letter my own work, but I have a proofreader. And even as the writer and the art director of my book, I have a text editor, because you need someone to look at your stuff. You need that scope. You need to step back and to admit you're not perfect. And those are the number one things that I recommend to people who really just want to start now and get something done.
Okay.
If I
So,
can,
yeah, let me just ask a few questions, and we'll have time for freeform at the end. But I have a whole list of questions that I want to get through today. So, what are some of the misconceptions? I'm addressing this to Randy and Cristian. You guys haven't had too much time to speak yet. What are some of the misconceptions about the publishing and self-publishing industry that new creators really are going to be shocked to learn?
Well, first, let me introduce myself too. Again, my name is Randy Reynaldo. I'm a self-publisher using the imprint WCG Comics, and my book is Rob Hayes Adventures. And speaking of vision, my book is basically, I wanted to do. I love the old adventure strips. So like Terry and the Pirates. I like Alex Toth, Will Eisner's The Spirit. So that I was really trying to capture that. So that was really my goal in doing my comics. I wanted to to capture that feel, but set in the modern day. So it's not a nostalgia book. It's set in the modern day and has that feel. And as a matter of fact, in 2018, I got an Inkpot Award from San Diego Comic-Con for my work. So that was a really great honor because I've been doing that show for a long time. In terms of misconceptions, especially since this is about how to self-publish, one thing I'd say, again, I started out as a zine, then I went into the direct market. Now I'm doing primarily mail order and shows. But what I would say is, in terms of distribution, again, when we're talking about self-publishing, is how much the game has changed. And that, like I said, when I started out, especially when I got into the direct market, I was using Diamond, but I was planning to call myself, I am a dinosaur in this business, because now you have Kickstarter and all these other ways to kind of fund your book that I haven't really explored, and because I found my own way of doing things. But there are different ways of getting out there, especially right now. The distribution market is in such flux right now. It's not a problem if you're a Marvel Image or DC, but for small publishers, it's really, really rough out there. I mean, in terms of getting into a comic book store. So I think that's the part, doing the comic book is one thing, but kind of rolling it out and marketing it, that's a whole other set of skills, and there's a time frame. And then the other thing I would also throw out there is the importance of getting books out on a regular schedule or frequently. And I'll be first to admit, I'm a self-publisher, and I do have a day job, so I actually put out about an issue a year. So for the market, for regular distribution, that's tough, unless and I do collect and trade paperbacks. But unless you're out there all the time, again, it depends what your goal is. But unless you're out there all the time hitting it, it can be a challenge to build an audience. You really have to hit the ground running. And just very quickly, the other thing I would say is, one thing I also have noticed when I would be approached by people interested in self-publishing is sometimes, Jerome mentioned this, the ambition. They tell me, oh yeah, I'm going to do this multi-volume story. And, I wouldn't say anything, but, it's not just the time, it's the energy. And then if you don't have the experience, I mean, for myself, fortunately, all my stories and issues are self-contained stories. And especially early on, I was doing like 8-page stories, 10-page stories that stand alone. I mean, together they form an arc, but you get a full story. And that helped me because, I would get, especially if I'm spending that long on doing an issue, you get kind of lost or saying, oh, I wish I was just done with this story. So doing stories that are like that, it's nice to just get them behind you and then start on the next one.
Sure. And earlier you said, just do the work. And I guess what I'm getting at is, you hear that often, but what is the work? I mean, we know you have to write, you have to draw, and you have to be able to transfer it to someone else so they can see it. But there are a million other steps hidden in there. And that's what I want to get at. What are the people who are listening today not thinking about when they start their project? And not that, you have to have it all figured out. A lot of it is an interesting journey of discovery. But Cristian, what are some of the misconceptions that you hear when you talk to young budding artists or creators?
Well, most people I don't think are ready. I think like when they're young, they're not ready. I mean, you have to. I mean, I wrote a book about this, and I did my career in a way where I burned all bridges, and I had too much pride to go back. And like, for example, I had a lucrative career in animation, and part of wanting to have my own business was that I didn't want to be a scrolling name that flew by on the screen. I wanted to make a name for myself as an artist, because what I do is like fine art. Like, I do all kinds of things. I also do graphic novels, like in a traditional sense, and I manage projects for independent creators. But I feel like what people don't realize, like, for example, I'm mentoring one person recently, one artist, and graduated. He's been out of school, I think, a year and a half, and he's frustrated that he doesn't have work, and he's like, he's trying to do other jobs, but he's trying to apply himself now to building a portfolio, at least freelancing online, getting other work, and I'm trying to guide him in that way. But the key thing is you have to survive as a creator first, and that's my story in a way, because whatever I made ended up being a calling card to what others wanted, and then I could provide a service, and that sustained me for 19 years so far as a freelancer. So while I've done all that, so I publish my own works, and then I service other creators or small companies, and some corporate clients for all aspects of comic book production. And then it's a juggling act to kind of publish your own work and then learn and edit your own work so it's more marketable, that you can unleash yourself of those corporate chains, so to speak, because I think what we all dream of as self publishers is for our work to really sell and to really be considered great, I think, and that's what we're striving for. But you can't give up. And for the student, I mean, you got to drop everything, and you have to be willing to die. And that's how I looked at it. But I mean, I was a little lucky in Canada because when I ran out of money and I bled all my credit cards, and that's a big mistake. I remember my father drove me to the Social Security office, and he dropped me in front, and he said, ask for help. So I accepted help for 40 weeks. And that's the most humbling part of my beginnings, I feel, because I never wanted to. And I kept saying in the preceding weeks, when I was running out of money very quickly, was that I was willing to die as an artist. And if you're not willing to do that, because you're going to change, but you have to go in 100%, and you have to be a little nuts. And I recommend it. That's my.
I thought it was part of the price of admission.
I like that. I like the direction you're going there, Cristian. But maybe just to make it a little bit more lighthearted, for those who maybe I'm with you on that. But maybe say from a different angle, would be that you have to plan ahead. You have to plan ahead, because finishing the work. I know a lot of people who are, like you're saying, they're not ready, and that's because they haven't finished most of the work. You're not really ready to start indie publishing unless you've finished the product or you're close. So what I'd recommend as far as it goes with planning is plan before you start the project, right? How long is this project going to be? How many pages? How long do you think it's going to take you personally to create that work? Or if you're collaborating with others, how long it's going to take them to be a part of that team to finish the work? And then when the work is finished, then you're actually ready, right? Because you have something tangible that you can either market or publish or put into some other format that gets it out into the world. As part of that planning process, I would say, figure out how much it's going to cost to print it and to get it out to your potential buyers. That's a really important part. I think one of the misconceptions about being an artist is that we're not good at math, or that we're not able to do math, or we're not able to plan, which, yes, it's maybe sometimes a little bit harder, but it's not impossible. And the reality is, if you're going to indie publish, it's a skill you need to improve, right? You need to be able to improve those abilities to be able to plan ahead and stick with the boundaries you provided, because the reality is, if your book is 20, 30 pages and it takes a certain amount of cost to print that book, you have to figure out how many multiples you need to put on that price so that it's actually worth getting done, right? So it's not just the cost of the paper, it's not just the cost of getting printed. You have to make sure that it was actually worth it financially to at least break even on whatever the cost and the effort that you put into that to get it done. If you're not able to cover the cost of printing and the cost of going to shows with those sales, then you're paying to be a part of that process. And maybe you need to do that for a little while, but it can't be, you can't sustain that forever, right? So if you're trying to develop an indie publishing venture, part of planning says, I need to figure out how long this book is going to be, how much it's going to cost me to print it, and how much can I charge for it so that it's actually worth the time and effort to get it done.
And I think you need to set reasonable deadlines, and you need to hit your deadlines and be accountable. I've been successfully publishing through crowdfunding for the past 4 years, and I highly recommend it. I think Kickstarter is the king and queen of the comics frontier right now, because you can be autonomous and you can build an audience, but only if you plan ahead, have most of the work done, like Jerome said, and you also have to factor in your own time for all of the writing and marketing and social media that's involved in the 30 or 60-day Kickstarter campaign. And that is like being P.T. Barnum for that finite amount of time. And it's a lot of fun. It's exhausting, but it's been worth it. And I recommend it to a lot of students and young people, because I see schools like SCAD and SVA. I see young groups of people put anthologies together. Those are the kind of projects that I like to back as an editing fossil that I call myself. I've been around the block in comics for so long, but when I'm kickstarting, what I notice is the community of the other people who are also launching campaigns at the same time I am. And I'm far more likely to actually help another group of SCAD students doing an anthology, let's say. I'm more likely to help them through my own social media channels and to also back their book than perhaps a TV star who is a comic book writer who wants to, join the industry. So that's one area where I think today's comic book makers are lucky, because like Randy said, in the 90s, you had very few opportunities to shop your work. And, I can tell you, as someone who used to every weekend go to St. Mark's Comics and Hanley's Universe in New York City and look at mini comics. I mean, that's how I found Becky Cloonan's work when she was first starting out. And Raina Telgemeier started her work through her work. Smile was a mini comic first. As an editor, I was pounding the pavement looking for especially new female and diverse creatives to bring to Vertigo DC Comics. Comics right now, the only excuse people have is that there isn't an excuse, it's fear. I think if people really want to self-publish, they need to do the research, like Jerome said. You got to get organized. And I think, I don't know anyone that likes that part of the job, but it's part of the gig. If you're self-publishing, it's your show. So you really got to step up and learn, to multitask, and also to learn projections. You have to do projections for the financial side, and also just for juggling so many plates, because if you're doing it all yourself, you've got to budget your own time. If you're working with other people, you need to be sure that those people are committed and will deliver on deadline, so that you can actually have, a comic or a zine in a finite amount of time and deliver to your backers as promised.
Yes. I want to circle back to something Jerome said, well, both of you mentioned actually, and that's planning and financial planning. So my book that came out last year, Border X, a 168-page anthology on the border crisis. I was so excited, got everything, all the files in to the printer, and I'm not going to mention who I worked with because I don't want to get sued. But so they quoted me as $7.40 per copy, which I thought was great. All the money goes to South Texas Human Rights Center. So that meant they were going to get about $9 from every sale. Wonderful. I can price it $15, $16. Great. then I started getting these alarming messages from that printing company. And long story short, I had to get lawyers involved, and now the book costs $26.52 to print. That doesn't include shipping, distribution, anything. That's an increase in 1 year of 358%. I am now making about $1 a book because I can't make it a $50 book. It's just not worth selling at that rate. And I feel it then becomes something that it wasn't intended to be. It was more of a populist tome that I wanted audiences to be able to get their hands on, rather than an elite art object, which it seems to be now, according to the price. So best laid plans sometimes go to the wayside. What is changing right now in the industry that is alarming to you, and that could be a sign of rough waters up ahead?
Paper shortage and the congestion at the LA port, which I'm facing right now with my current book. Right before this panel, I just did a backer update. My book, Filth and Grammar, that I mentioned is, I promised it to my backers in March of 2022. And I've worked with a wonderful printer called Trivision. They're based in Korea. They have an office in LA, and their port is in Long Beach. And I drive there. My husband and I live in LA. So we run off register.press, which I didn't mention earlier. I currently work with my husband. We call it his and hers Comics and Design Lab, but I digress. So I told my backers today, I sent them a link to the LA Times article. Recently, President Biden said he was going to keep the port open 24/7, and hopefully that's going to help with the backlog. But I wanted my backers to know that even though my book, which is 160 pages, which we've worked on since June, is doing great. My files are due to the printer in November. I'm looking good. There might be a delay that I can't stop, because it's affecting everyone. So paper shortage, paper prices, and congestion at ports are things that, like the pandemic, that sadly we, as self-publishers, we don't have too much control over. So what I recommend to people is you've got to be accountable and you've got to show full disclosure. I mean, I think people will understand if you regularly update them. So I do that fortnightly for my backers on Kickstarter. I must ask you, Mauricio, what happened to you with your book? And I know you said you can't mention the printer, but can you please tell us, did they misquote you, or did you not sign an agreement that was clear?
It without getting into too many details, it was just a price creep that I got a batch perfectly fine. Then they said, well, each time we print this, it ruins our printers, which I find doubtful because I learned offset printing on a Heidelberg 3000. So I do know a bit about how the offset process works. And I kept asking and pushing for explanations, and it may or may not have been a geographical problem with workers that were not content with the content of the book. So that was the first part of the trouble, was in the factory. They didn't appreciate the liberal bent to the volume. So we got past that. That's when the lawyer was called in. And then just like clockwork, 3% increase, 10% increase. Now you need a different paper stock. Now we need to change. So now you the only way we'll print your volume is if it's a super premium product, on and on. So it was kind of strong arming, and we were already in too deep. So obviously someone I won't work with again. But one of these things, like you said, that you just can't plan on. You think that you're going to send your files in and you're going to get books back, and it somehow was not that simple in this case.
Yeah, I would say that in the publishing, like any small business in particular, not just business in general, but small business is fraught with dangers that are unknown right around the corner, right? When you think you have it figured out, even if you, like I said before, best laid plans. That's a great adage to remember going into something like indie comics. There's just things that you cannot foresee, and especially when you're just starting out, that could be part of the really steep learning curve that can be so difficult for a lot of people. And that's why they give up, because there's just so many things that you didn't know going in, right? And I appreciate what you said before, Cristian, and I totally agree. Sometimes you just jump in, right, with both feet, and let your passion carry you as far as it can. But then at some point, that passion has to be merged with and come in synchronicity with a certain level of knowledge, and what are the lessons learned from those challenges and from those those mishaps that, again, some of them are not in our control, whether it be the pandemic or overseas shipping challenges, or things like that. What are the lessons we can learn that might help us in the next project to be able to deliver for the reader, right? Because at the end of the day, the customer is almost always right. We make a promise, particularly when they're pre-ordering or pre-funding via Kickstarter, and we have to do whatever we can, whatever is in our power, to deliver on that promise, because that's what they care about the most. I mean, they care about the message, they care about why you're doing what you're doing, but just as equally, they care about that you're able to deliver what you said you would deliver. And so, as a indie comic creator, that's what I would, if you don't take away anything else from what I say today, this is what you should take away from it, that you have to deliver for the customer, right? And so, you're running a business and you have customers, and they believe in you. They put a little bit of faith in you, and so you have to deliver on that promise. And so it can be tough, right? I mean, our last project with Forward Comics our last published project that we did was a Kickstarter project that was meant to be delivered in March of 2020. And that's right.
I had one of those.
Right on the eve, right?
I had one of those
right
too,
on the
Kickstarter.
eve of when the pandemic hit the States, and everything went upside down overnight. And it was just something I did not foresee, and it was not something that anyone foresaw. The one thing that was probably a saving grace was that, and I recommend this, that you got to give yourself a little bit of leeway, a little bit of wiggle room between when you promise to deliver and when you're going to have it in hand, right? So you give yourself a little bit of space, if you can, to say that I know that I can get the funds in hand to get this printed, and then in theory, if things go right, I'm going to have it by this date. However, I'm not going to deliver it. I'm not going to fulfill my promise until maybe a month out or 2 months out, because if something goes sideways, I have a little bit of time to adjust and come up with a plan B or whatever the case might be. And so that was probably one of the saving graces for our Kickstarter project. We got the book delivered, and then everything shut down. Right? And so, so certainly it was terrible, but I had a little bit of leeway there to kind of just figure out how I could just make sure that my shipping was really efficient, right? So that when things began to open up again, I could begin to use that buffer to be able to deliver things in a timely way that, the reality is that it was only about a month late. After all was said and done, only about a month late, us being able to ship those books out compared to, that actual promise. So giving yourself a little bit of leeway in your production process, in your delivery process, is really going to help quite a bit. And I feel so bad for you, Mauricio. That's a terrible situation, because again, you did not foresee that. And as Shelly was hinting at before, you were a customer to that printer, and they broke their promise, right? They quoted you and they broke their promise. And so then now, because it's such a strange community of providers that makes indie comics happen, you have customers, but then you are a customer to your printer. And so then finding a really, really reliable source to print and distribute it's really important because those are people you're going to rely on. Those are companies you're going to rely on to be able to fulfill your promise to your customers.
And just pick up on the word you said, breaking. So a lot of creators are so focused on breaking into the industry. I want to look at what happens when they're in and then they break their own career, when their career falls apart, when they do something horribly wrong. What happens? What are the things that people are doing to sort of sabotage their careers once they've got their foot in the door?
Who's going to take that one? Cristian.
Well, Randy hasn't spoken in a while, so I'd like if you want to say something, you go first, Randy.
Well, being a self-publisher, I'm my own boss, so but what I would say, and I'm still a part of this industry, is it seems to me is not being dependable. I mean, if especially if you're working for a company or even with colleagues. I mean, if you don't deliver your piece and then you get a reputation for not being dependable, that will make it, you're digging yourself a hole. That's what I would think. But at the same time, for myself, I have a body of work behind me, and it's both perennial stuff and then I have new stuff, so that helps a lot.
Excellent.
I'd like to add that, well, to the topic earlier where, yes, well, first of all, when you go in, when you're starting, you have to trust yourself, and you have to trust that if you fail, you as a human being, can take anything and can survive and keep rolling and keep adapting. And I feel like that's a philosophy that I carried with me from the beginning. And then, business wise, you do have to, actually that first summer when I was like running out of money, I did a business plan. I only realized after I registered my company that I should have done a business plan way before. And then, so ever since, now I do a business plan every like 2 years and I pivot. So for example, like during the pandemic, it was really easy for me because I pivoted. I had so many things on my plate in terms of like different things I was publishing. Like, for example, I was making short films and I was writing screenplays. So I was and producing through Indiegogo short films that way. So, technically it's like producing and publishing. So rather than follow through on like making a feature, that was my intent at the beginning of 2020, I pivoted and shifted back into publishing. I did a new business plan, a big business plan, because I figured, hey, like I've got the time. And then so I pivoted back into things that worked over the years, which was the publishing, but linked to teaching, so I revitalized like the art school. But my point is that you have to think like a business person if you want to survive. And survival is key, but not like survival in like a desperate sort of sense. Like you have to you gotta just trust everything, man. Like I hate to be like, cheery and stuff, but like it's just, you have to carry that energy because, here in New York, you walk on the street and you see like homeless people, like, with like heroin injected legs, that should be falling off, and you go, I've seen that guy on the subway for like 5-6 years now and he's still alive. If he can be alive and he's thriving and he can still beg for change, me with like a clear mind, some education, I can make anything, so I think you have to be of that kind of positive mindset from the beginning, because that's kind of like the key. And then you have to see yourself, like when you do your business plan, you do it like 5 years ahead, but then you should also see yourself, I think, like when I started in 2002, I had kind of like like a philosophical kind of breakthrough in a sense, because I saw like, I finished school and now it's going to be my career, my business. So, and I thought heavily about what I wanted. But at that very beginning, I saw 30, 40 years in advance, like roughly. So I knew I was going to be all right, provided I don't get hit by a bus, So in a business sense, one, you have to trust yourself, but you have to do the work. I mean, it sounds abstract, but you have to just do like the stuff that nobody else likes to do. And as a self-publisher, you have to wear all the hats, and some of them are just not fun. Like doing your own bookkeeping is not fun, but you got to keep those receipts. Researching things can be fun, but like I love to look at paper and all these things, and that was it's always my funnest thing. I love dealing with printers and building relationships. But the market is changing in a lot of ways too, because whatever, the paper shortage is kind of new to me, but if that's true, then that's fine, because everything is moving digitally anyway. So like this new generation, they don't have the relationship with paper that we had growing up, and paper products. I mean, it's a luxury, to have like a book and to have that relationship. But I think like a lot of content, especially comics, is absorbed digitally now. So that's one thing that I'm personally conscious of in terms of distribution, is to move with the times, to cut down my costs, either just do print on demand. Like I don't print like 300 copies of a product that didn't test the market, and 300 copies was a lot of copies for me at the time. And now I don't print any. I just I do the research, and I have like paperback available. I have hardcover available, and I get the proofs, and everything's like the top quality. But it's print on demand, and for things that is text only, I also have audiobooks.
Okay. We have to wrap this up, and I'm going to answer my own question about what's my biggest pet peeve that I see with a lot of younger, and older, to be frank, creators, is answer your email. If someone says, can you meet on Wednesday?
Yeah.
Just write back yes and suggest a time. It's amazing. I had one person contact me 2 months ago to see if they could still get into Border X. A year and a half late. So, it would have been great to have time. Shelly, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to agree with you. In the book that I'm working on, I start the book by saying I have 4 expectations of people that work with me. Top of the list, number 1 is confirm receipt. It is infuriating, whether it's a phone call, whether it's an email, to not know somebody received the information, and it does trip you up. So I applaud you. That's an amazing and perfect note.
Yeah, I wish we had an audience to applaud everyone
Right?
here.
Well,
And the reason I did this, it's probably pretty obvious, but all the books that I read, and gosh, Shelly, I could talk hours about Bitterroot. One of my favorite comics. All the comics that I love are about characters who go through hell before things get better. And that's why I wanted to put you guys into this mindset, because yes, it's great to have a positive attitude, but we've got that positive attitude because of our struggle and what we've learned along the way. And if we can prevent someone from having to struggle on something unnecessarily, so they can focus on the better struggle of the creative struggle, I think we've done them a service. Ramon, good to see you.
Hey, Mauricio, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
One thing I wanted to mention, I don't know if we're still on, but like the challenge with self-publishing that a lot of people don't realize is that you have to really strive very heavily to make like a mainstream product, So the editing, that's like the main thing that I learned over the years. You really have to be your own best editor, especially if you're your own business, and it has to like be top quality. You have to look at that you have to fit within a certain market and look at that market and do the cover for that market, like in your style, but it has to fit on a shelf next to books that are like that, and yeah, so you have to fit in still.
I want to thank everybody for playing along with my little game. And Ramon,
I saw that post on Facebook. You're gonna turn things around. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. I thought it made it even more fun. I want to thank everybody for attending. Shelly has
for
always
having
been
me.
supportive of Diversity Comic Con. She gave us
Oh.
that book for a gift 2 years ago, and Jerome was with us from the very beginning, and so was Cristian. And
Nice.
Randy, welcome to the fold. It's nice to see a fellow Los Angelino. Actually, Shelly's also a fellow Los Angelino.
I am now, and I'm sweating.
You are now.
I
Right.
miss New York, everybody. I'm waiting for turtleneck weather. It's not coming, is it?
No, it's not. But
Thank
before,
you for inviting me.
Let me add that I am a native New Yorker. I was born in Staten Island.
oh, I didn't know that.
Nice.
Oh yeah, and I
We are all connected.
was born in Brooklyn and raised in Staten Island.
Didn't
I was
know
born
that.
in Manhattan, raised in Bronx.
Okay. Anyways, I'd like to invite you all and everybody listening or watching to our after party tonight. It's on the website. You will see that's called Creator Virtual Networking. So it's at 8:00, and you can join it. It's hosted by Kumo Space. And the last piece of business I want to share is that we are giving away a $20 Amazon gift certificate to one of the audience members, as well as this book. This is the book that we published last year as part of the Diversity Comic Con. We didn't do it this year because I almost killed myself last year
Oh God.
trying to get this out. So the way you can win this gift certificate and book is there is a link on the website called Contact. So the third person who emails me with the subject matter self-publishing as the subject, the third person who sends me the email will win the gift certificate and the book. Okay.
Nice.
So you can do that right now. Just click on Contact on our website. It'll be the email, and you can send it to us. And I want to thank you all again for doing this. And I hope next year we will be live when we do this. But I'm thinking that we will do half and half. We will do live and we will do online because we're getting a lot of people from around the world attending. So I don't want to lose that. And again, thank you very much, everybody. And I hope to see you guys sometime soon.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
And Mauricio,
Tomorrow,
thank you.
12 to
You
4.
did a great job. Yes, 12 to 4. If you have a table, 12 to 4, come to
Yeah. Thanks, guys. It was really fun getting to know you guys too. And
tomorrow.
let's keep in touch.
Eastern Standard Time.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Great
Bye.
seeing you all.
Bye,
Bye,
guys.
everyone.